All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm going to get started in just a moment. All right. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Social Finance Thematic Interest Group of the American Evaluation Association. My name is Miriam Tardif-Douglan, and I'm at the North Carolina Healthcare Foundation. I'm also serving as the webinar chair of the Social Finance Thematic Interest Group. To help us get to know you better, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and your organization in your name, your Zoom title. For those of you who are not familiar, the American Evaluation Association is a professional association of evaluators devoted to the application and exploration of evaluation as a profession. AEA has approximately 6,000 members across all 50 states and even in 80 foreign countries. I'll put a link in the chat so you can learn more about AEA. And specifically, the Social Finance Thematic Interest Group is called the SIFTIG for short. We are a group of AEA members who are interested in the topic of social impact measurement and management and exploring the interplay between the social and financial return of investments. We come from many backgrounds, from evaluators and evaluation commissioners to investors and investees. Membership in our TAG means that you want to learn more about evaluating the social impact of organizations that are aiming to produce both a social and a financial return, whether you're at the forefront of this work or just learning about it. I'll put a few more links in the chat. We're always welcoming new members, so I'll add the link for that. And also, all our webinars are recorded, as is this one. You can find them on our website, which I will also link to in the chat momentarily. Each webinar in our 2026 series touches on the 2026 AEA conference theme, which is evaluation across boundaries. We have a very exciting webinar today focused on AI as a thought partner to evaluative thinking in the social finance space. Now, without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker today. Michael Brown is the head of research at Wharton Impact, where he helps lead research on impact investing, corporate responsibility, and social enterprise. In addition to his role at Wharton, Michael has an active independent consulting practice focused on research, impact assessment, and strategy development. Michael came to Wharton from the University of Chicago, where he completed a PhD in sociology. As a note, before I turn it over to Dr. Brown, we ask that you please save your questions for after Michael's presentation. He looks forward to taking your questions during the post-presentation Q&A, which we'll have plenty of time for. All right, Michael, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me a moment here. Okay, screen 2. Right, I'm assuming everyone sees the cover page there. Miriam, can I get a thumbs up if you can see that? Yeah? Okay. I'm going to assume that we can get it. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so I am looking forward to sharing some findings from recent research that I completed on the role of AI as a thought partner in impact assessment, particularly in the context of impact investing. I should mention that there is an academic article that has a currently a revise and resubmit at the American Journal of Evaluation, so that's looking promising. So there is a fuller academic treatment of this topic. I'm going to go over some of the theoretical background here, but this is going to be a relatively high-level practitioner-oriented treatment of this topic. If it would be okay, could everyone just mute their mics, or whoever's the host, if they could, if all the mics could be muted, just so that I don't hear any. I'm hearing some additional audio right now. Okay. Is it possible to do that before I get started? Is that on? Am I the host? Should I do that, or? Yeah. Okay, we're good. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So with that
Sorry,
said,
there
let me
was
just
someone
get
who was
started
unmuted
here
and
by
I muted them, and I'll monitor
suggesting
that.
that many impact. Okay, no problem. I'd like to begin by suggesting that many impact investors and philanthropy professionals view impact measurement in terms of quantitative precision. And this is especially true in impact investing, where practitioners have the template of commercial investing in mind. So to them, especially, impact measurement is supposed to be the impact equivalent of financial performance measurement. And so they think of impact measurement as SROI, net promoter scores, KPI dashboards, all of these heavily quantitative outputs. That's the impact. That's the image of impact measurement from the outside. From the inside, I expect that most, if not all of you, would agree that the reality is quite different. So yes, we use quantitative tools to measure impact, but there's a huge amount of ambiguity in our work. I had a recent experience of this that I think will resonate with many of you. I was developing an impact measurement plan for a maternal health care company, and my colleague asked me about the number of lives touched by this company. And that led to this drawn out conversation about what lives touched means in this context. Are we talking about the mothers, the mother baby dyads, the broader family unit, the community level? So that's an example of what I mean by ambiguity. Conclusions about what and how to measure require judgment calls that reasonable people will often disagree on. And the critical point that I want to make here is that these judgment calls are often based on dialogue, in-person conversations, Zoom calls, email threads, margin notes. A whole lot of impact measurement and evaluation basically involves talking through ambiguity. And this brings us to AI. So I've argued that a lot of impact measurement is based on dialogue, and we need to recognize that there's a new format of dialogue that many of us have been experiencing over the past few years. So these chatbots, these large language models, they provide a new form of conversation, and that raises the question of what happens to impact measurement focused dialogue when the interlocutor is a chatbot. Now, in my view, past research has focused largely on how efficient and how accurate these tools are, but especially in the evaluation field, there hasn't been much focus on the process of talking through judgment calls and how that might change when you're doing that with AI. Now, before I go into my findings on this topic, I want to spend just a couple minutes providing some theoretical background because I really do think that the background is critical. I'm going to keep it brief and light here, but as I mentioned, there's an academic article I've written that goes into much more depth in case anyone's interested. So first of all, I am not the first one to notice, obviously, the importance of dialogue and evaluation. There's a fairly developed record of scholarship on this topic. This is a screenshot of the byline of an article in a special issue on dialogue in the journal Evaluation. This is from 2001, and I think that shows that there's a relatively long paper trail of research on dialogue and evaluation. Now, what I'd like to point out about this research is that in general, scholars have presented a substantive rather than procedural understanding of dialogue. And those are terms that I'm taking from this special issue. So a procedural rendering of dialogue focuses on the mechanics, turn taking, information exchange. A substantive understanding of dialogue, in contrast, focuses on dialogue as a mode of understanding, relating, connecting. As the lead author of the article here puts it, dialogue is more than just talk. More specifically, my review of this literature on dialogue in evaluation surfaced three aspects of what makes dialogue substantive rather than just an exchange of statements. So first is what I'll call grounded judgment. This is the idea that in a professional evaluation context, we're often talking to people who have convictions and positions that are informed by their reading, by their temperament, by formative life experiences. So especially with time, we develop these orientations that are grounded in who we are as people and as professionals. Second is shared working context. This refers to shared social languages and sort of implicit understandings that are particular to a given context. So probably the easiest way to illustrate this is with a term like theory of change. So we all know that different people and organizations use the term theory of change in often very different ways. And having a shared working context with colleagues gives you awareness of what that term means in your specific setting. What were the debates that narrowed the term scope, the cases that set precedents for how it's applied, the sort of the tacit agreements about what it is understood to cover and to not cover. So that's shared working context. And then finally, the idea of relationship stakes speaks to the relationship context, accountability, and the possibility of recognition that makes evaluative dialogue socially important. So when you challenge a colleague's decision or reasoning about an evaluation, you're doing that as someone whose judgment will be remembered, whose relationship with that colleague could be affected, and whose reputation is at stake. So we all talk to each other with that social weight operating in the background. So these are the three components of a substantive understanding of dialogue: grounded judgment, shared working context, and relationship stakes. And what I want to argue is that LLMs or chatbots largely lack these distinctive features of substantive dialogue. They can maintain the basic procedural form of dialogue, again, that turn taking, that responsiveness, but they lack grounded judgment, shared working context, and relationship stakes. And so the research question that follows is what happens to evaluative deliberation in the absence of those key features? So to answer that question, I recruited staff at 10 impact investing firms to participate in this study. Generally, the participants were heads of impact, and sometimes an associate joined as well. So the total number of interviewees was 13. I gave each participant a University of Pennsylvania enterprise license for ChatGPT, meaning that they could upload sensitive and proprietary information without worrying about that data going to OpenAI for model training. I should mention that for most of the project, participants used ChatGPT 4.0 and 0.1. Toward the end of the study, they also used ChatGPT 5, and for the most part, there were no major differences in their experiences across these models, as far as I could tell. And then I asked them to think through high ambiguity impact assessment problems with ChatGPT. Now, they were, of course, free to use ChatGPT for other things, but I was particularly interested in how they would use the tool to think through the more complex aspects of impact measurement. And so I collected their reflections through interviews, two focus groups, and written reports. Okay, so with all that background, let's move on to the findings now. First, just a quick comment on this topic of efficiency, reliability, and accuracy. So as I mentioned, this is where a lot of past research on these tools has focused, and I wasn't trying to duplicate that work. I'll just say quickly that the study participants generally found the models, the chatbots, very useful. They appreciated the speed and convenience of the tools, even though there were concerns about hallucinations, unreliable sourcing, etc. So to those of you who are familiar with LLMs, you know that this is a well-known issue, and the same thing played out in this study as well. Prompting sophistication varied considerably across participants, and that to a large extent affected the degree of efficiency, reliability, and accuracy that the participants experienced. And we'll talk about that some more later. Again, these topics are covered in other research, so I'm going to leave it at that and get back to the core focus of this research, which is dialogue and evaluative reasoning. So starting with grounded judgment and the absence of grounded judgment in the case of ChatGPT, there was what I call a productive side and a limiting side to this absence. And just to preview, this is a structure that will follow with my findings on the absence of shared working context and the absence of relationship stakes as well. I found that there's a productive aspect and a limiting aspect to each of these absences. On the absence of grounded judgment, the productive aspect was that ChatGPT was very good at articulating competing positions. It could really play the various sides to an argument quite well, and that was useful for surfacing assumptions, thinking through different options, pressure testing ideas. As one interviewee put it, it was able to, in a very neutral way, state possibilities that would provoke an extreme reaction in some conversations with humans. Being able to just read it on the page of here's one option, here's another option, that did add value. So basically, ChatGPT held no position of its own in an organic sense. And so it could articulate competing positions with equal facility, and that was useful for really expanding the field of consideration. On the limiting side, though, ChatGPT's lack of anchored commitments meant it could basically be steered toward nearly any conclusion. There was sort of an untethered responsiveness and agreeableness that participants found irritating. It undermined the value of the exchange. So in this quote, the interviewee states, if you give instructions not to do something, you wonder if it's just being contrarian because you told it not to agree. It's a blank slate that you're projecting something on. And so what we have overall are productive and limiting dimensions that are two faces of the same feature. The lack of grounded judgment enabled wide-ranging exploration, but that exploration often felt sort of undisciplined. There was no position ChatGPT was really staking itself to, and the participants really noticed that. Moving to the absence of shared working context, the productive side of this absence was particularly clear in cases where ChatGPT's literal interpretation of framework language exposed assumptions that had been important but sort of implicit and uncodified. So this quote at the bottom left here comes from probably the most interesting example that surfaced in my interviews. So the participants' team had provided ChatGPT with an impact assessment framework specifying that investments should create outcomes for the bottom 40% of household income. And the team had implicitly operationalized that requirement as affordability to lower income populations. But when ChatGPT assessed a specific company, a personalized nutrition company that was priced beyond the reach of that group, it actually rated the investment as very high impact. And it did that because it reasoned that the company's preventive health benefits would reduce the burden on the national health system and therefore free public health capacity to serve lower income populations. Now, the participant reported to me that he challenged this rating on affordability grounds, and ChatGPT replied that the user never specified affordability. So, as the quote reads, it said, "Nothing you've given me has the word affordable in it." And that was something none of our team recognized. So in that way, ChatGPT helped this team to realize, to convert informal shared knowledge into more explicit criteria. And that was productive for sure. And there were other similar examples that came up in the interviews. On the limiting side, though, the LLM's sort of outsider position meant that it often was missing important unwritten conventions, and that sort of made conversations tedious sometimes. One participant, for example, described a case where the model didn't grasp that a seemingly impact neutral company could be a strong impact investment because of the investment firm's practice of trying to actively steer portfolio companies toward greater impact over time. And so this participant acknowledged that this was not written down anywhere. It was just sort of a cultural norm of the firm. But ChatGPT didn't know that, obviously. And this quote here captures this dynamic well. The participant said, "There's also a dynamic, culturally and experience-based skill and context that matters. I think none of that can be conveyed to ChatGPT." So those are the productive and limiting sides of the absence of shared working context. Finally, there is the absence of relationship stakes. Now, on the productive side, the benefit was removing the cost of candor. Participants were free to expose their own uncertainty, their dissent, their ignorance, and there was obviously no concern about saving face. A couple of participants also admitted that it was nice to not have to say please all the time. They could be just sort of terse and to the point, which was liberating in a way. So one participant admitted to having a conversation with ChatGPT about a company and just in the middle of the conversation asking, wait, what does this company do again? And this, I remember this participant acknowledged in the interview that this kind of candor and admitting ignorance would be much more awkward in a conversation with a colleague, especially a senior colleague. But with a chatbot, there was no real cost to it, which was sort of freeing. On the limiting side, participants reported that the dialogue with ChatGPT often felt kind of thin because you're talking to a bot. There was sort of a hollowness to it. And this quote here captures this point in an interview when I asked the participant, I asked as a follow-up if this hollowness was coming from the experience of talking to a bot or from the more mechanical experience of typing and interacting through a computer monitor. And she insisted that no, it's because you're talking to a bot. She mentioned that she had an associate who she would talk to all the time on Teams, on Microsoft Teams, and it was perfectly fine. So as she said, it's not that it's typing or sitting in front of a screen, it's that it's just not a human on the other side. And that really affected the valence of the conversation. So those are the productive and limiting aspects of these three sort of dialogic absences that are apparent in conversations with ChatGPT. But I don't want to suggest that this was uniform across the board. There were various strategies that participants deployed to sort of moderate and manage the limiting aspects of these absences. And so I want to talk about those strategies. Specifically, so how much can you tailor your conversations with ChatGPT with prompting strategies and uploading information and so on? So, in terms of prompting grounded judgment into existence, this could be sort of partially approximated through prompting. So, participants reported using sort of adversarial and persona-based strategies that sometimes produce useful pushback. So they would tell ChatGPT, I want you to argue for this point, be the devil's advocate to in this argument. And that was sometimes useful, but it often felt performative rather than really committed. So as this quote says, I told it to be sort of no nonsense, and it gives these responses couched in this very, I'm going to give it to you straight tone that's so awkward and fake seeming. I told it to be skeptical, and when I give it this edge case, it's probably going to tell me it's not good enough. But if I say try to be open-minded, then it's going to tell me that it's good enough. So in a way, even if you're asking it to be adversarial, it's still being agreeable in a sense. So there was partial this limiting aspect of the absence of grounded judgment could be moderated to some extent, but not entirely. Same goes for prompting shared working context. This could be supplied through document uploads, explanations of how a firm operates, explanations of precedents, and explanations of organizational norms. That was often very helpful. But at the same time, some knowledge about the implicit culture of a firm is difficult to articulate. And sometimes it's not even really front and center in our own minds because it's so baked into how we work in a given organization. So as one respondent put it, how do you factor in the vibes in an organization? Like, here's all the facts on paper, but I met this founder and they blew me away with their commitment and theory of change. And I think there's more potential here than what you see on paper. So it's difficult sometimes to load up ChatGPT with all of this context when a lot of it is just sort of, as the participant put it, sort of vibes based. And then as far as prompting relationship stakes, this is kind of the standout case where there was really relationship stakes was just largely immune to prompting. No participant even really attempted to simulate the relational substance of human dialogue. I know that there is all this talk about people forming relationships with chatbots. None of the participants in this research project evidenced that trend. One said, I still feel like I need to take that and hash it out with a person, whereas I wouldn't do that with my associate. I know her and I trust her. She's a human and we work together. ChatGPT is a first step to me still. So there's this trend, there was this pattern of talking things out with ChatGPT, but then kind of escalating the conversation to a human for that final validation. There needed to be a human in the loop. So this is just a summary slide with the recap of the findings. I'm not going to rehash it just in the interest of time, but I'm happy to go back to this slide during the Q&A if it's helpful. I'm just going to draw out a couple of practical takeaways before we move to Q&A. I have here just sort of a list of use cases based on my research where I think that ChatGPT and other chatbots really add value. So surveying the argumentative landscape, again, with that absence of grounded judgment, that can really be helpful. Same thing goes with pressure testing, preliminary reasoning, auditing frameworks and rubrics. Again, sometimes we develop these frameworks and rubrics with certain assumptions baked in. We don't always know what those assumptions are, and having a thought partner, as it were, like these bots can really surface those assumptions. Exploring positions with low social cost. You can share controversial, unpopular opinions, and no one's going to judge you or fire you or whatever. And then, of course, just the more basic bounded analytical tasks of summarizing, drafting, and retrieving information. The participants got a lot of value out of that. And again, that was slightly out of the scope of my research project, but it was still definitely evident in the interviews. And then I just want to conclude by offering a caution. So again, the participants got a fair amount of value from these LLM exchanges. They were fast, they were always available. There's at that absence of social friction, and I worry that this can create pressure toward just working with chatbots a lot. And I wonder what happens as we get more comfortable with LLM generated analyses, because the interpersonal dynamics that I've described here that these models generally cannot supply, I think that they're central to sound evaluation practice. Those limiting aspects can only, so far at least, can only be partially managed and moderated. And so I really think that these bots, these tools are force multipliers, but they're not substitutes for the human role in impact measurement and evaluation. And I think that we need to have a conversation about how we can use these tools judiciously in a way that doesn't supplant what really needs to be a human-centered practice, at least given the current evidence. Okay, so that's my presentation. That's the overview of the findings, and I'm happy to have a conversation, have a dialogue now about what we've learned.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, anyone feel free to come off mute and ask questions. We do have a question from Tina Faulkner, if you wouldn't, or Tina, if you wouldn't mind asking that.
Oh, sure thing, Miriam. And thanks very much, Michael. This is very interesting. I am by no means an AI expert, but I do know that you can change the settings, of course, in ChatGPT, et cetera, to make it sort of less agreeable, et cetera. And I was wondering if you looked at that or if any of the participants looked at the changing that and the effects of that on kind of that grounded judgment aspect. Thanks.
Yeah. So I did share that information in a tutorial that I gave each of the participants, just noted that you can have these background instructions. I don't believe maybe one participant actually did that. From my experience and from my understanding, it's sort of like an automatic prompt that the chatbot starts the conversation with. So I think it's largely similar to just having instructions as prompts at the beginning of the conversation. So, and that they certainly did, as I shared in the presentation. So I think in general, even with those instructions, you get part of the way there. You'll get a more adversarial tone. You'll get some more persistence. But again, based on my understanding, it often feels somewhat performative and hollow, and you'll find that over time, the agreeableness is really quite baked into these models right now. I know that people call this sycophancy, which I really enjoy. That used to be an SAT word that no one used, and all of a sudden it's like it's in all of our lexicons now.
That is very true. One benefit, one benefit.
Right. Oh, and I saw just a really quick question. I saw a question from Vivian about the years the study covered. It was largely 2025. ChatGPT. I know that sometimes participants used Perplexity and Claude. That was their judgment call, but the account that I gave them was ChatGPT through the Penn Enterprise license. Any other questions, comments?
Can
I
I
can't
just
figure
jump
out how.
in?
I'm
Sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, Michael, really interesting study. Your last point about interpersonal dynamics are central to sound evaluation practice. Uh, can you elaborate more on that? I know you had also mentioned in the course of the presentation the vibes that an impact investment officer or evaluator get from interacting with the potential investment or program person is not, they can't easily be factored into ChatGPT because that's a
Mhm,
real world interaction.
mhm.
But I guess in theory, I'm wondering, what does the human do better than what this AI agent can ultimately be trained to do?
Yeah. Well, I think that I'm just improvising right now. I should think about this more deeply, but right now, two things are coming to mind. First of all, there's just the organic process of what impact measurement looks like in practice, especially in the context of impact investing firms, which is what I focused on in this project. A lot of it is very quick and interaction based. There are site visits that need to be conducted. There are meetings where you're shaking hands, where you're reading people's faces, where you're getting a sense of how committed someone is by, just how they use certain words and string together sentences and just kind of come across in the exchange. A lot of that is embodied and just at this point requires a human to do it. Just perhaps in some future there will be, robots accompanying us on these site visits or whatever. But right now, a lot of that is just human centered, and the chatbots are kind of supplements to specific parts of the impact measurement and impact investing process. So as of right now, ChatGPT just can't, or chatbots cannot substitute for that. In term focusing more narrowly on the dialogue, talking about impact assessment issues, whether through a computer or in person, there I think that there are interpersonal dynamics that are really important to evaluation. And I tried to summarize them with this framework of grounded judgment, shared working context, and relationship stakes. I think that this is a values laden field, and we're looking to have conversations with other people who don't necessarily share our values, but who have some sort of value orientation, because that makes the experience of talking through these issues more genuine. If you're just talking to a bot that's been trained up to, string together words in certain ways and retrieve information in certain ways, that can get you part of the way there. But I think there's going to be a kind of a persistent shortcoming to that, where you're going to continuously want to go back to a human and validate it based on someone who has idiosyncratic genetic predispositions and specific life experiences and histories, where like you really get that traction of disagreement or agreement. Like when you come to an agreement with someone after a series of disagreements or after a drawn out conversation, there's something there's a kind of a catharsis there that I don't think you get, at least I don't get, and the participants didn't seem to get with chatbots. So that's my riff on that. Caitlin, I know you had a question. You have your hand up now.
Yes, I figured out how to find the raise hand feature. It was hidden. So thank you, Vivian, for plugging that one. This actually goes a little bit to Vivian and Ichiro's questions in the chat as well. Michael, wondering if you can talk through a few specific use cases that are, maybe we're beyond kind of a dialogue about maybe a particular deal, and something that I've been thinking about that's like really IMM specific. Impact investors tend to have, ex ante these impact rating tools, for
Mhm.
example. Was there anyone in the pilot that, instead of kind of like going through the use cases, like kind of an initial dialogue, auditing tools, is there anyone who kind of fed it, hey, here are all of the diligence materials for a particular deal. Here is the tool we typically use to rate this deal and come out with like a preliminary assessment that I can bring to my investment officer and have a dialogue about kind of was there anything like that or any other kind of use cases that we all can be thinking about as we think about how we implement AI in our own IMM work?
Yes, that was a common practice. The healthcare, the personalized nutrition company that I mentioned, that was pretty much what you just described. So there was an impact assessment framework, there was some diligence material, and the user requested that ChatGPT provide a score, a rating, and along with the reasoning for that rating, right? And that's what prompted the dialogue about like, why are you not? This is not affordable. Why are you not? Ranking it accordingly. And that's what led to this realization that the bot had found another pathway to benefiting lower income households, which was in some ways completely ridiculous, right? But at the same time, affordable was not in the criteria, and surfacing that point was really useful. There were other examples of that. Some participants just had conversations like, what do you think of this company? We focus on this, this is what I think this company does. What do you let's have a conversation about whether this makes sense. But there were sometimes much more analytical conversations where there was an expected output like a rating or a score. And that was always, and that was often I think the most useful exercise, because it was really, that's really where the rubber meets the road, right? When it comes to impact assessment, like give me a score with with footnotes on why you think this is a high impact or low or moderate impact. What's the degree of alignment with a theory of change? So that was common, yeah. And I think it's really helpful. I see another hand from Elizabeth here.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thanks for sharing this research. It's fascinating. One of the factors that you mentioned couldn't necessarily be captured by AI was the sense of vibes between individuals, meaning a founder who had particularly good demonstration of commitment. Did the participants or did you conclude that there might be sort of an iterative sequencing of using human dialogue and then ChatGPT and then back to human dialogue? Because those vibes can be really useful. They can also be a source of bias.
Yes.
So I'm interested if there was a frequency of iteration that came out of the recommendations around how to incorporate AI.
I don't think I was that specific in my recommendations about a set frequency. Um, there was that seems like that would be a very disciplined and I think shrewd use of AI to be deliberate about going from human dialogue to AI dialogue to like to continually kind of check the downsides of this dialogue versus that dialogue. I think that that will likely develop with time. right now, I don't think people have developed those kinds of systematic protocols for how to effectively use AI. They're just kind of reaching for their computer here and there when they have the time, when they feel like they need a little bit of input. But I think it would be great if that were baked into kind of codified best practices, because I completely agree. Sometimes you really need that kind of tacit substrate of conversation. You need the vibes. You need to have that handshake and to kind of get a sense for a person. But often that leads to a whole bunch of pathological issues with homophily and networking effects and various biases that we fall prey to. And I think that in that way, ChatGPT can be a really useful corrective, recognizing, of course, I'm using ChatGPT as a shorthand for chatbots as well in general. Um, Recognizing, of course, that these bots also have their own biases baked into them based on training data and what they're exposed to when they're kind of booted up. So yeah, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, I guess, with counteracting these biases.
Thank you.
I don't know. I wasn't following the chat log here, so I don't know if we have any other questions. Let me just take a look here.
Ichiro, looks like Ichiro, you had a question.
Okay.
Maybe I can elaborate since already Caitlin talked about it, but no, my question was, what kind of specific dialogue question the participant had with chatbot, and I think you explained one good example was sharing the ex-ante framework, the scoring framework with chatbot, and maybe with the result of the investment, and asked their opinion. And if that's the case, you know, is it was it possible for those ChatGPT to understand the ex-ante rating or scoring framework, and they were able to provide their own assessment? And related to that, when we use AI, we tend to have problem, or we tend to think that the problem is we cannot really, or we should still, as a human, verify the outcome produced from the AI. So when you use the AI for the dialogue, I think it was more like conversational or it's informal. But was there any concern that maybe the response or the conversation that you had with chatbot may not be accurate, and then how the human can ensure that the feedback or the conversation you are having with chatbot are somehow accurate? Thank you.
Yeah, hallucinations and like just inaccurate sourcing, those were common issues, but they were a little bit less salient in the kind of dialogue that I was focused on. Because a lot of this was asking for a judgment call, asking for an opinion. Sometimes participants, often actually participants did like, the deep research prompt, like, give me a landscape scan, give me all the background information that I need in order to evaluate this company. And there, it's the issue of hallucinations was, and errors in general, was much more consequential and much more just visible. Now, the way to check two things about hallucinations. One, my sense is that at least for the kind of work that I'm describing right now, there has been progress with the hallucination issue. I've heard different stances on this, but based on my own experience, at least, it seems like hallucinations remain a problem, but not as much of a problem as it was with ChatGPT 3.5 or whatever it was that we got in late 2022 or whatever. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I always kind of compare the issue of hallucinations to the human counterfactual. So I'm not necessarily looking for perfection with these tools. I'm looking for an improvement over what you get from a human analyst. And I remember, pre-2022, I remember what that was like. Sometimes you get a memo and there's a lack of a citation or a wrong citation or a misinterpreted coefficient or whatever it is. And so I've found, in my experience at least, and to some extent from based on the experience of the participants, that these tools are often quite accurate, and it's not so much an issue of hallucination. It's an issue of like overgeneralizing or recency bias. Some of these like kind of broader issues that humans fall victim to a lot as well. Yeah.
It looks like Spencer you had a question as well.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, happy to read mine out loud. Yeah, thanks, Michael. Really interesting to hear all about this. I was wondering about whether the sophistication differences of users had an effect on their takeaways here. Certainly earlier on in my own use of AI and LLMs, um, I may not have been as big of a fan. Over the last 3 years, like working at the GitLab Foundation, we started developing a lot of sophisticated mechanisms for that, and started to get more adoption across the organization. Just in general, wondering if any advanced users started setting up kind of like larger defined workflows. I think the more context you can put into your analysis, including kind of AI transcripts of those back and forth conversations with investees, um, definitely helps bring out some of that. So just curious if there was a difference that you saw.
yes, absolutely. And I actually wonder if I haven't given that enough attention in my presentation and my article. I've presented prompting sophistication as a moderating factor that, to varying degrees, moderates the limiting aspects of these absences that I've discussed. But even when it's just a partial moderation, it's significant. Especially, I think, with shared working context, it's you can really give some helpful information to a chatbot so that it understands the kind of organization you're coming from. And I don't think you even have to type up everything in explicit instructions. You can just sort of upload the latest annual report and it can sort of get a sense like, okay, this seems to be an impact first fund. This seems to be, clearly there's a focus on fintech here. So it can really it can really ramp up quite quickly with understanding, again, that shared working context. I think with with grounded judgment, it's still partial, but I think you can get enough mileage out of that with prompting sophistication to really helpfully pressure test ideas. Again, it's not going to be a perfect representation of someone with true conviction, at least right now. But I think that you can still get a lot of value from a well-prompted chatbot if you want to have a genuine debate. And then again, with relationship stakes, I think that that's a separate issue, and it kind of gets to the nature of dialogue itself. But yeah, the short answer is that prompting sophistication was a major variable, and especially, even though this is sort of beyond the scope of the study, especially in terms of the more kind of downstream analytical tasks that participants often undertook, but that I was less focused on. So like, summarizing memos, doing Excel analyses, enhanced Google searches, like doing research reports on a specific sector or vertical or whatever. There, the degree you want to have a nice beefy prompt when you do something like that with lots of instructions and guardrails and stuff like that. So that's a major factor, I think.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
I have one question, Michael. When you spoke earlier about that relational thinness
Mhm.
characteristic, did that reduce the value of the ChatGPT interactions for multiple users, or was it more like a matter of preference for some of them?
Um, I think that I mean there were pros and cons, right? Like that's kind of I would say the overarching theme of this research is that the relational thinness was actually an asset in some cases because you can just get down to business with these things, right? And in certain cases, that's nice and liberating. You can ask stupid questions without being judged. You can be rude and curt, and there's no real social implication. Sometimes when there's a deadline, yeah, that's how you want to do it. But there's also the downside, and I think that we are culturally embedded beings who form relationships even in professional contexts, and there's some sort of utility to having these conversations with someone who seems to have common cause with you, who has a history with you, who you can sort of entrust with certain information. It's a little bit harder to operationalize in some cases, but it did seem to affect the value overall of these deliberative exchanges.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Sure. I see another question here from Caitlin. Hold on, let me just see if I missed any others. Okay, we're talking a lot about ex ante use cases. Any ex post data analysis use cases? That was a little bit less common, and when ex post evaluation happened, it was more of those analytical tasks that were in a kind of a separate category. Like, here's the data, give me the output, analyze these data. Um, but I'd say in general, the same findings hold up because there's still ambiguity that you have to unpack, even with the analysis of quantitative data. Like, okay, what do we make of these results? How do we properly contextualize them? I think just for the context of this project, participants were engaging the chatbot during this initial diligence phase because that's where a lot of the ambiguity is, and that's where like these judgment calls really matter a whole lot, have serious downstream implications. So that's where they gravitated to in general for the purposes of the study. But I think that my findings generalize to ex post as well. That's my assumption. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. Miriam, I see that you've just gone off mute. Did you want to
I
wrap
was
up or
just,
ask? Oh, I see we have a question from Vivian.
yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Michael. So it's interesting that you just use the word generalizable because I put a comment in the chat about that. It seemed to me that your immediate or direct findings for this work could have easily been, I mean, the sector or the field could have been any field related that does evaluation. So I was wondering if you had anything specific to say, anything that was really impact measurement and management specific about the findings of your research. And then I'm wondering what's next. I think there are a lot of interesting follow-ups or follow-ons to this research. What are you hoping to explore next in this realm?
Sure. Yeah, I think that this is the themes of grounded judgment, shared working context, and relationship stakes are generalizable. Yeah, I don't think there's anything particular to evaluation here. I think that the relevance to evaluation is in the examples that I provide in the piece. These themes are sourced from theoretical traditions that are cited in that 2001 special issue that I mentioned. People like, Mikhail Bakhtin and Martin Buber, and these are philosophers who were not evaluators. They were philosophers, and evaluation scholars appropriated those concepts to understand how this operates in the context of evaluation. So yeah, I think your point is well taken. These are generalizable themes, and I have just applied them to the specific context of impact assessment in impact investing for the benefit of our space. In terms of what's next, I am really interested in the more concrete area of using these chatbots as research assistants and sort of expert subject matter experts. I have been interested in the promise and perils of evidence-based practice for a long time. This was a chapter of my dissertation is focused on this. It's a theme that we've been dealing with as the social sector for over 100 years. Like, how do we integrate pre-existing evidence into our decision making thoughtfully and effectively and efficiently? And there's a really interesting opportunity here with LLMs to do these literature reviews that take a minute long but cite hundreds of sources, right? It does feel like a game changer, but I can also see all sorts of disadvantages as well when we automate this process so heavily. So I am exploring opportunities to start up another research project that looks more specifically at the role of AI in impact diligence and specifically research evidence use. I see Elizabeth has a question.
Yeah, one more question. Thank you. This is fascinating research. What do you anticipate will be the usefulness of AI in helping us address the complexity of interdependent variables. Thinking about the wicked problems that we're dealing with in society and the complexity versus the complicatedness of problems as we shift away from linear solutions into interventions that might deal with some of that complexity. I've been really interested in how AI is going to evolve to help us account for those projected interdependencies. Do you see that as something that could be of real value to us? And where do you think we are on the continuum of development of AI to be able to really help us do better in thinking about those wicked problems?
Wow. I'm fairly bullish on AI. Let me just be upfront about that. You might have sensed that in this presentation. It's a very controversial topic. Everyone's there are people who are constantly poo-pooing it. There are people who are constantly celebrating it and touting it. I like to think that I have a disciplined and well-reasoned sort of middle of the road view that I've presented here with the pros and the cons and everything. But let me just be clear. I think that this is a really compelling technology, and I think that it will be very helpful for dealing with interdependent variables, both in terms of conceptualization and in terms of research design. And first of all, identifying what the degree of interdependability among variables and why that exists. These are conversations that I've had with in my case Claude usually, just trying to understand like how should I think about this factor vis-a-vis this factor and that factor and this and that. And then also in terms of research design, like okay, we've established that these are interdependent variables. How do we pick them apart to some degree in in the process of actually developing a research study or in the process of analyzing data where we have variables that are entangled like this. I've used ChatGPT and Claude for structural equation modeling and cluster analysis. I've used it for statistical methods, and I find that it's often very, very helpful. That's my experience.
Great. Thank you.
Looks like we have a question from Caitlin too.
Oh, yes. You mentioned you were summarizing findings in a paper. Is that published yet? So the paper is not published yet. It's I submitted it to American Journal of Evaluation, and it has received an R&R. So I just have to make some relatively marginal revisions in my view, and hopefully it'll be forthcoming soon. Thanks.
Thanks for that question, Caitlin. Oh, Catherine. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I was actually wondering the same thing too. I didn't ask because I wasn't sure if you'd already told us. But it's helpful to know. I don't see any other questions right now. So I'll just I'll wrap us up with a couple points. Again, thank you all for a great conversation and all your really thoughtful questions. Hold on. Do we have a late breaking question? Spencer, do you want to share that or just is it just FYI? Okay. Great. All right. Thank you all for a great conversation. I'm gonna post a recording of this webinar on YouTube and it'll be on our channel. I'll post it on LinkedIn as well. And yeah, if there's anyone that you know who wanted to attend this but wasn't able to, please do share the recording with them so that they can see that as well. Yeah, but once again, thank you for joining this webinar. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate the interest.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Michael.